Takahiro は虫も殺せない子供でした。
Hello everyone, thank you all very much once again for joining me as we dive into yet another horrible case that involved the internet as we continue our exploration into the question of whether or not the worst monsters are no longer hiding in the dark, but out here in the light of the technology in front of our faces. But before we begin today's case though, I want to give a very, very big thank you and a shout out to all of you, the members of the BuzzFeed Unsolved network community. Not only is today's case one that was suggested by numerous members of the audience who messaged me on Twitter and Instagram, but furthermore, this episode will be the first one that features animations throughout, and those animations are being made by a member of our audience, a part of our Discord server, a part of our community right here. Her name is Phia. She's a very talented artist. And if you want to be a part of our growing Bun community on Discord, the link to the server is down in the description below. So swing on by. I'm there every single day so we can hang out. You can chat with other members of the Bun audience about Bun content, potential cases for us to cover here on the Unsolved Network, true crime, supernatural, and all kinds of other fun stuff. So swing on by. But until then, let's begin with this not so fun case. Now, in every one of these videos, I ask you all to send me messages on Instagram or Twitter with cases you'd like me to cover, and this was probably the most requested one by numerous members of the Bun audience, that case being the multiple murders of Takahiro Shiraishi, otherwise known as the Twitter Killer. For today's case, we travel to the land of the rising sun, Japan, a country rich with culture and history, and a nation that stands today as a modern technological leader. The technological landscape of Japan was also the hunting ground of Takahiro Shiraishi, a modern-day serial killer who became notoriously known as the Twitter Killer. Due to Japanese privacy laws, the names of Shiraishi's victims are withheld, but hopefully, by charting the bloody course that Shiraishi embarked upon, we can glean further insight into the intermingling of murder and technology, especially in a foreign land. Now, the thing that fascinates me about this case is the fact that normally we assume, myself included, that serial killers are somewhat a thing of the past. We associate them with people like Bundy, Dahmer from decades ago, thinking that technology has improved to the point where, these people can be more easily caught before they get out of hand, which is true to an extent. But a case like this one is a very stark reminder that even with all the technological improvements in the world, even in a place as technologically advanced like Japan, there are people who will continue to find ways to commit their dark and evil deeds. Oof. Takahiro Shiraishi, like several infamous killers before him, was known to his neighbors as a cheerful, kind, and polite man, with those same neighbors shocked when they heard of the crimes he had committed. Someone who knew Shiraishi when they were younger even described him as a quiet child who was able to socialize with neighbors. Pretty much at this point, it's like a running gag that all these monsters come across as seemingly friendly and kind people to their neighbors and the people who knew them. It's like they all took the same sort of course together. But even as a younger man, there was unique behavior that Shiraishi engaged in that could have served as a warning sign for what was to come, with one of Shiraishi's friends recalling that they would play a game where they would choke each other to the point of nearly passing out for fun. After Shiraishi graduated high school, luring women with insidious intent was a skill he started to hone long before his murderous spree, as he began working for a prostitution ring in the Kabukicho district of Tokyo as a sex industry scout. His job was to lure young women to the clubs in the district. He would use Twitter for his recruiting purposes, but was eventually arrested in February 2017 by police for his work in the sex trade and was given a suspended sentence. Now, I personally don't use my Twitter that much. However, it's interesting to think about how a platform like Twitter is being used by prostitution rings as a scouting network. After finding himself unemployed in 2017, Shiraishi began to apply his experience hunting women on Twitter for far, far darker purposes. Shiraishi found his victims by targeting people who were already suicidal and luring them over Twitter, hence the nickname that would later be bestowed upon him. Shiraishi had 5 Twitter accounts. One of his handles was @HangingPro. It was later revealed during his trial that he would post statements such as, "It is not hard to hang oneself," and "If you cannot help yourself, I can help you." Shiraishi had built a substantial following on his accounts, one of them captioned, "I want to die," and another, "A professional at hanging." Shiraishi would later say during his trial that It was easier for me to convince people with worries and other issues and manipulate them to my way of thinking. Shiraishi promised the suicidal individuals that he would be able to kill them, and sometimes promised that he would kill himself with them. With one victim, Shiraishi pretended to be a spiritual leader who could help those seeking to end their life. In another case, he created a suicide pact. His victims ranged from ages 15 to 26, and they were all female with the exception of one male, a friend of one of the female victims who was trying to track her down. Shiraishi would meet his victims at a train station near their house and then escort them to his apartment. Shiraishi would then give the woman alcohol, sleeping pills, tranquilizers, and then rape them. After killing his victims, he would chop the flesh off of the bone and throw their flesh out with the trash. He would then sprinkle cat litter over the flesh to further prevent discovery. As Shiraishi later told investigators, "There is no doubt that I sliced up the bodies in my bathroom with the intention of destroying evidence. I disposed of their flesh and internal organs like garbage, but kept their bones out of fear that I would be caught." I just don't understand why he would keep the bones out of fear of being caught, because I would assume that if you were afraid of being caught, you would toss the bones out. But I don't know, maybe one of you have some insights to share with me. Shiraishi's 9-person killing spree lasted from August to October 2017. While investigating the disappearance of a 23-year-old woman, the police were led to Shiraishi via Twitter. The victim had previously posted on the social media platform that she had wanted to take her own life, tweeting, "I'm looking for someone to die with me." The victim's brother logged into her account and found suspicious interactions with another user. One of the victim's followers told the brother that she recognized the handle. The brother then asked her to contact Shiraishi at the handle while he reported the user to the police. The young woman, who reached out to Shiraishi, convinced him to meet her at a train station where the police were hiding, and they followed him back to his place. When Shiraishi arrived home, the police knocked on his door and quickly found a white bag that belonged to the missing woman. Investigators then asked Shiraishi about the whereabouts of the woman, to which he replied, "Inside the cooler," and pointed at a cooler. Oof, well, I guess when the jig was up, he knew it. He certainly didn't bother lying. Shiraishi told investigators that he had killed his victim soon after moving into his apartment on August 22, 2017. He spent 3 days taking her body apart. He then killed her boyfriend, who had come searching for her. Among a collection of arm and leg bones, the police also found 9 heads safely stored in toolboxes and coolers. 240 bones in total were found stored away in Shiraishi's apartment. 9 heads, 240 bones. Eesh. Before he was indicted in 2018, Shiraishi underwent 5 months of psychiatric tests, where it was eventually found that Shiraishi was mentally stable. Prosecutors wanted Shiraishi to be sentenced with the death penalty, while his defendants proposed that he be charged with murder with consent instead, claiming that it was a more appropriate sentence because his victims gave permission to be killed. Shiraishi then gave his own account during the trial and said that he did not kill his victims with their consent. Shiraishi stated that he had even killed one of his victims while she was sleeping, and another after she had spoken about wanting to go out to eat and stop at a game parlor. Shiraishi also admitted that he had no interest in suicide himself, but used it as an angle to find the people he would kill. In interviews during the trial, Shiraishi complained that it was taking too long and that he would be happy to accept the death penalty. I mean, what a moment in court that must have been. You've got this defense attorney trying to get Shiraishi off, and he's like, nah, yeah, the defense attorney's talking out of his ass. I did it. Judge Naokuni Yano would state at his sentencing that all the murders were well planned and the modus operandi makes it one of the most malicious murderers ever in the history of crime. It caused massive shock and anxiety to a society where the use of social media is commonplace. At the trial, Shiraishi said to the victims' families, "I am sorry for having killed some of the victims with whom I spent a lot of time and would like to apologize to these families. But for the others, I don't really feel a sense of regret. In any case, I am sorry only because I failed when I got caught. If I wasn't arrested, I will not be regretting anything." On December 15, 2020, at the age of 30, Shiraishi was given the death penalty, where in Japan it is carried out by hanging. It's worth noting that, in Japan, those sentenced to death do not know when they will be hanged until the day of execution. Typically, a death row inmate waits years for their day to come. One of the victim's fathers would go on to say, "Personally, I wanted him to get a life sentence over which he has no choice but to atone for his wrongdoings, rather than give him the death penalty he wanted." Another father said he will never forgive Shiraishi even if he dies. "Even now, when I see a woman of my daughter's age, I mistake her for my daughter. This pain will never go away. Give her back to me." Let me know what you all think, but is the father kind of right in saying that because Shiraishi got what he wanted in the death penalty, perhaps the better punishment would have been for him to spend the rest of his life in prison? Just food for thought, I guess. Since the trial, Shiraishi has expressed that, "Now I want to meet an ordinary girl. I want to get married. I want to find a marriage partner while I am in jail." The case has sparked a discussion in Japan as to how suicide should be handled, largely considering how to handle those contemplating taking their own life and websites used to discuss the topic. Japan has previously dealt with extremely high suicide rates, ranking among one of the highest suicide rates in the world. In 2016, their death by suicide rate was 18.5 per 100,000 people. The reasons for Japan's high suicide rate is nuanced, but the top contributing factors are typically stigma around mental health issues, long work hours, social isolation, and pressure in academia. And while improved measures over the decade building up to 2019 led to a decline in the numbers, COVID-19 has seemingly reversed the progress. Notably, as of October 2020, more people died in Japan from suicide than COVID-19 in 2020, with the suicide number rising to 2,153 that month, while 2020 COVID-19 deaths totaled at 2,087. Now, as I mentioned just there, the topic of suicide and mental health in Japan is a very nuanced one with a lot of cultural context that obviously I can't provide, and it's worth its own time and separate video. But it is actually interesting. Just a very quick parallel that comes to mind is the fact that prior to covering the Twitter killer, a case or a serial killer I had contemplated doing a video about was a man named Hiroshi Mayu. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing his name. I think it might be Hiroshi Mayu. He was a Japanese serial killer from the mid-2000s who also found his victims via online suicide websites, forums, clubs, and his modus operandi was somewhat similar to Takahiro Shiraishi. It just makes me wonder, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially from anyone who is Japanese, of maybe there are deeper parallels between why killers like Hiroshi Mayu or Takahiro Shiraishi were able to capitalize on what seems to be a larger issue of mental health and suicide in Japan. In response to this case, Twitter has updated its regulations to stand staunchly against any promotion of suicidal ideation. Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey spoke on the case, saying it was extremely sad and that Twitter would make sure that it is being used in positive and healthy ways. The Japanese government has also expanded its mental health care to expanding hotlines and creating more support channels online. I don't think it's any surprise really that I got so many messages on Instagram and Twitter from people suggesting this case, considering the recency of it all. I mean, Shiraishi was just sentenced to death in December of last year, just a few months ago. And so I think it goes back to my earlier point where, at least for me, it is fascinating to see a modern serial killer in action. And of course, by fascinating, I don't mean that in a good way, but it's interesting to see how, despite technological improvements, people continue to find a way. And it's a very scary thought that ties directly into our question of whether or not the worst monsters are no longer hiding in the dark and now living in the technology beaming in front of our faces. But I guess the larger question is also like when we look into these individuals' childhoods, right? We like Shiraishi's friend mentioned as how they were kids, they enjoyed choking each other out. Like if technology wasn't in the question, would he still have found ways to commit these murders that didn't involve technology? Is it one of those things that is like a nature versus nurture sort of conversation? I don't know. I would love to hear your thoughts. And as always, if you have a case you'd like me to cover in a future video, much like I covered the one today, after many of you suggested it, shoot me a message, and who knows, maybe the next time I'm detailing a case, it will be one that you sent in. Until then though, take care and stay safe online.